Story 1. The buzz of the crowded bleachers fueled my anticipation as we waited for our team to storm onto the field. I bounced my knees, relishing these electric Friday night lights after a long school week. Beside me, my best bud Derek grinned, clearly buzzed on more than just school spirit. I chuckled knowingly since I had helped him smuggle in a few road sodas for us to enjoy the game with. When halftime arrived a couple hours later with our team embarrassingly behind, Derek nudged me with a mischievous look. "Wanna take the party to the woods after this slaughter ends?" He tipped his flask sneakily. "Might as well make our own fun if we're gonna lose anyway." I laughed, used to Derek's antics by now. "Sure man, maybe we'll actually see your elusive Lenape ghost you're always raving about." Our rural town had been built right over Native American burial grounds years ago. Local legend held that one elderly female sachem haunted the remaining wooded areas surrounding the high school seeking justice for her people. Most kids dismissed the myth, but ever since Derek claimed he saw the apparition the year before, he talked obsessively about catching real evidence. I just humored his paranormal fascinations, going along on his frequent woodland vigils. But our only encounters ever were with raccoons or deer. When the game finally ended with our pitiful defeat, Derek and I lingered in the vacant bleachers, watching stragglers head out. Fog rolled over the shadowy field below as the stadium lights clicked off, amplifying the eerie atmosphere. Derek shot me a wicked grin, ready to meet the sachem. Laughing under my breath at his dedication, I followed him down the bleachers. But when my shoe caught on the seat, momentum carried me tumbling forward. I grunted, throwing my hands out instinctively to catch my fall. Searing pain sliced through my left palm, where it scraped concrete. Hissing, I examined the nasty gash now oozing on my hand. "You good, dude?" Derek asked, bouncing back. "Yeah, I just sliced my hand pretty bad." I grimaced, wincing as I tried flexing my stiff fingers. Derek helped me wrap it with his bandana to stem the bleeding for now. Luckily, the injury was to my non-dominant hand. No way I was missing our midnight adventure because of some silly tumble. After raiding Derek's car for the rest of his secret liquor stash, we headed for the break in the wood's perimeter fence. The silhouettes of trees stood stark against the night clouds gathering overhead. I shivered slightly despite the late summer humidity. Soon we sat concealed in a small gully passing Derek's flask back and forth. The debatable ghost-sighting rock, he deemed it sat cold and mundane as ever. With liquid courage coursing through me though, I tried setting a taunting tone, daring any spectral woman to show herself. "Come on, ancient lady, quit hiding from us," I croaked tipsily. "Where's our vengeance for trespassing on your land? Too scared to face a couple kids, right?" Derek cackled loudly, amping up the provocation. "Yeah, we cleaned your precious tribe years ago. What are you gonna do about it, huh?" His raucous tone shattered the heavy silence smothering the shadowed forest. Unease trickled down my spine when only mute darkness answered our foolhardy calls. Suddenly, this whole dare seemed less fun, the dangers of disturbing unknown forces dawning on me. What if provoking angry spirits was supremely unwise? "Let's head back. I'm over this," I muttered, skin crawling as the woods appeared to creep nearer. But Derek sprang excitedly to his feet instead. "There, look," he shouted, pointing uphill where a hulking figure loomed between the trees surrounding us. Twin pinpoints of light hovered where its face should be as an ominous groan resonated from that direction. All liquid courage fled my body. "What the actual hell?" I whispered, pulse skyrocketing. Squinting against the gloom, the hover lights almost resembled eyes reflecting the scant moonlight. Another unearthly moan echoed towards us, closer this time. Derek staggered backwards, nearly toppling over the rock. "Screw this, I'm out." I scrambled desperately after him, no longer hindered by drunkenness with pure adrenaline now surging through me. Crushing blindly through the underbrush, I risked a panicked glance over my shoulder. To my horror, the darkened silhouette glided silently behind us somehow, twin gaze lights trained straight at me. I spun forward just as my foot caught a tree root. Arms flailing, I smacked the forest floor hard. Searing pain exploded in my gouged hand, and the wind got knocked from my lungs. Gasping raggedly, I stared back at the entity hovering above me, poised to claim my doomed soul or exact revenge for disturbing these ancient grounds. But instead of ghostly wailing, familiar laughter rang out. Squinting against the glare of Derek's flashlight suddenly blinding me, I gawked in dismay, taking in his hysterical face. Still catching my breath in gulps, I shoved to my feet and punched his arm. "You freaking jerk," I burst out. This was all some haunted house prank. Derek could barely respond, he was laughing too hard. But he managed to point behind me. I followed the beam of his flashlight uphill to where two of our classmates doubled over whooping. Goosebumps rippled down my arms, realizing I had mistaken their winter hunting gear for an otherworldly figure of darkness seconds ago. "You should have seen your faces," one guy choked out between fits of laughter. They had staged the entire eerie encounter utilizing the creepy atmosphere and our gullible intoxication to terrify us. I grudgingly laughed too at our utter obliviousness. But an uneasy weight still pressed on my nerves from how convincingly they had conjured such fear in us. It was nearing 1 a.m. by then. Still reeling, I for once just wanted my bed after enough real terror for one night. Derek agreed, pride clearly wounded over falling for their prank. We rode back, brooding in irritated silence, until pulling up at my darkened house. As I slid from his car, that uneasy aura returned tenfold, taking in my parents' emptied driveway. A foreboding notion took sudden hold that vulnerable solitude waited inside instead of my anticipated safe haven. I shoved the unwarranted dread aside, blaming delayed hysteria from being spooked all night. Though still on edge, I forced a casual tone, saying goodnight to Derek, and headed up the walkway fishing for my keys. As the front door creaked open, silence greeted me instead of the familiar hum of appliances or creaks from my old house settling. I cleared my throat loudly just to fill the void, flicking on lights as I went. Parents must have decided to stay downtown. I muttered when no response came. Dumping my backpack on the kitchen counter, I rifled the fridge for leftover pizza. But my grip faltered as an unexpected reflection materialized in the chrome door behind me. A hulking silhouette hovering at the edge of the living room. I spun around, gaping at the unwelcome figure oozing from the shadows. Twin points of light fixed on me from sunken holes in the imposing intruder's makeshift mask. Oily dread spilled down my spine when he took an unsteady, lurching step into the light, his hunting knife glinting dully by his side. I stumbled backward in horror just as fetid whiskey breath clogged the air between us. He swayed before me, tilting his head, assessing his terrified quarry. I shrunk further against the counter, screams lodged in my throat. Abruptly he swooped toward me, massive hands latching onto my neck, easily wresting my pathetic struggles. Cold steel kissed my heaving ribs. Behind the tattered mask, his Cheshire grin shone wet and ghastly. "Let's play our own game," he rasped, rancid breath hot on my face. I thrashed desperately against his crushing hold, my bandaged hand slick with blood against his iron grip. Demented delight lit his shadowed eyes, taking in my anguish. He pressed the jagged blade flat along my jaw as I whimpered. "Such soft young skin," he purred, trailing the knife down my throat. "Think your parents will enjoy my artwork when they find your body." Just then a car rumbled up the drive, headlights briefly illuminating us locked in our molded stance. The intruder startled badly at the sound. Then a loud, urgent banging shattered the night from just outside the front door, followed by my dad's booming voice. "Son, open up. Police are on their way already." In a rage, the psycho stranger surged forwards, his monstrous hands crushing mercilessly around my windpipe, sadistic exhilaration contorting his terrible features. My despairing wails came out choked and thin against his brutal assault. Dark spots swirled across my vision as he increased pressure, intent on snuffing out my life before the police arrived. Summoning my last scraps of strength, I smashed my heel down onto his boot, hoping to stagger him even slightly. By some miracle it worked. He grunted in surprise, loosening his death grip just enough for me to tear free with a ragged gasp. I lunged past him, staggering wildly towards my dad's echoing shouts from the driveway, each step certain to be my last as the psycho's enraged roar filled the house. Any second, his ruthless hands would snatch me back into oblivion. To my bewilderment, the fatal grab never came. Risking a frantic look behind, I saw only empty space swirling with shadows. Somehow, in just a blink, the stalking murderer had vanished as quickly as he appeared. Confused, but focused only on escape, I crashed through the front door into my parents' arms, hysterical screams ripping from my raw throat. While they tried calming my gagging sobs, I begged them over and over to not go back inside, where that monster lurked claiming his next victim. Within minutes, police swarming the property confirmed no one remained inside. They conducted an extensive sweep of the surrounding area as well, but found no signs of forced entry or the armed assailant I tearfully described. Unease settled heavily inside me, even tucked safely in bed upstairs later that night, now guarded under armed surveillance outside. Something unnatural had happened. Escaping my understanding, but not my memory, which replayed the chilling encounter on an endless loop each time I closed my wearied eyes. Perhaps the vengeful female sachem from local lore hadn't been real earlier, that fog-filled night in the forest. But something far more sinister, somehow both phantom and flesh, had certainly fixated hungrily upon me thereafter. And though rational explanations eluded authorities and parents alike, cold truth rested inside me. I had narrowly escaped the savage clutches of the embodiment of evil itself. That gruesome masked face would haunt my dreams until my last quivering breath. Worse still stirred the bleak realization that one day, whether next week or years from now, we would cross paths again when my numbered days ran dry. And no person or security would stand between me and its thirst to finish what had started that nightmare evening. Story 2. I live in rural New Brunswick. It was early September, and it was my first day of school. I unfortunately was held back my senior year, so I'd be returning as a 19-year-old. I live in a rural area, so the middle school and high school was the same building, which also meant I knew most of the kids since it was a smaller school. When I got to school, I had study hall period, which was the first period of the day. However, I noticed a new kid that I never met before on the other side of the room. I walked over to him and introduced myself. He introduced himself to me as Chester, and that he just moved here. I showed him around the school and showed him where his next class was. As I was giving him a tour of the school, I noticed he seemed a bit off. As I was showing him around, he began to ask me questions. At first, it seemed normal, like how long I've been at the school or where our classroom was. But then he asked me some questions that seemed more strange. One question he asked stood out the most. He had asked for my address and Snapchat. I was completely thrown off by this because I found it odd to ask that. I ended up not giving him my address, but I thought, why not give him my Snapchat? I gave it to him and went on with my day. When the last period of the day came, I had English class. When I got to it, I noticed that there were only about 9 kids in the class. I was in the lowest level English class, so I wasn't expecting a lot of kids to be in my class. I took my seat, and that's when I looked 120 degrees behind me and saw that Chester kid eating a disgusting sandwich. He stared at me from the opposite side of the room and gestured for me to walk over to him. My English teacher, Mr. Bess, was about to start class, so I ignored him and went on with the class. 5 minutes later, I looked up from my book, and I noticed Chester again staring at me. This time he was more pissed off looking. Again, he gestured for me to walk over to him, and again I continued reading my book. Then my phone pinged. It was a Snapchat message from Chester. He said, "Follow me." I replied, "I can't, we're in the middle of class." Next, I saw him get up from his table and asked Mr. Bess if he could go to the bathroom. He then walked out into the hall. I wanted to see why he wanted me to follow him, so 5 minutes later, I asked Mr. Bess if I could go to the bathroom as well. I then walked out into the hall. I didn't know where he went, so I looked down each hallway and eventually I saw him. He was walking really slowly, about 50 feet away. I stayed a distance behind him so that he wouldn't know I was there. He then turned down a hallway in the school that wasn't really used for classes and was more for storage, bathrooms and offices. I then saw him open a door. He walked inside and shut the door behind him. I walked over to the door he walked in and recognized it to be the door that led to the school's basement. There was no way in hell I was going down there. I just casually went back to my class. When I got back, my phone pinged. It was him again. First, he sent me a message saying, "Why didn't you enter the basement?" He then sent a picture of him eating a disgusting sandwich in the basement. He sent one more chat asking me to walk down into the basement. By now, I was getting creeped out by this kid, so I replied asking him to leave me alone. I then removed and blocked him. When I got home, I immediately started on my homework. By the time I was done, it was about 11 p.m., and I was home alone. I was putting all of my homework away. Just then my phone received a notification from Snapchat. Someone added me as a friend. It was from an account called "Why Didn't You Enter the Basement?" It was him, so I blocked it. Then a couple minutes later, I got another request. This time the account was called "Why'd You Block Me?" I blocked that one, and then another one came. This one was even more ominous. It was called "I Know Where You Live," followed by "I'm right outside your house." And just then I heard a window break downstairs. I immediately called the cops and told them what was happening. The operator said find a safe place to hide and lock the door. I then hung up and went into the hallway closet. I heard footsteps move from downstairs to upstairs. I cracked open the closet door and I saw him at the end of the hallway in the dark. I saw Chester. It didn't seem like he knew that I noticed him until he turned his head to look at the closet, but it didn't seem like he knew I was inside. I didn't close the door, but I hid deeper in the closet. Chester then went over and opened the door. I was hiding behind a large container while he struggled to find the light. He eventually gave up, and I heard his footsteps fade away downstairs. Seconds later, the police knocked on the door. I immediately opened it and told him what happened, but by the time they arrived, Chester was gone, and there was nobody on my property. They found out that he escaped through a window in my basement. I gave the police the accounts, and they said they'll do their best to trace them. The very next day of school, I went to the principal to report Chester, but the creepiest thing was what he told me. My principal said that there was nobody in the whole school named Chester. There were no records of him ever having been a student. I got chills. The camera footage was checked, and it turned out that he snuck in through a back entrance of the school and blended in with the other kids. I never saw him again at school, and I never heard from the police. But to this day, I still think about why he wanted me to go into the school basement. All I can say is that was probably the most dangerous person I'd ever met, and I don't know what his intentions were. Story 3. I sank lower in my seat as the new kid entered first period and introduced himself awkwardly to the class. Great, another weirdo to avoid this year, I thought. But of course, with my luck, the only remaining desk was right next to mine. I internally groaned watching the stringy-haired boy amble my direction after the teacher pointed him to the empty seat. "Hey man, I'm Gavin," he offered, dropping heavily down beside me. I muttered my name in return, avoiding eye contact. He proceeded to ramble about just moving here, while I pretended to be engrossed in the astronomy notes on my desk. But I could feel his beady gaze attempting to bond as he prattled on about video games and other mundane topics. When the teacher finally started lecturing, I allowed myself to relax slightly. But my relief shriveled hearing Gavin chuckle under his breath at awkward intervals during class. I tensed, further realizing we'd have to partner for an upcoming project. Fortunately, the bell rang before he could invite himself over or continue forcing a connection. At lunch, I warned my friends Ben and Connor about the odd addition to our class. But speak of the devil, 30 minutes into the period, a tray slammed down next to me, and the bushy-haired creep squeezed onto the bench uninvited. I avoided eye contact with my friends, mortified they had to witness this weirdo I was clearly stuck with now. When Ben directly asked him to give me space, Gavin just giggled strangely instead of taking the hint. After multiple unsuccessful attempts to divert his inappropriate jokes and overfamiliarity, my friends finally gave me exasperated looks and relocated across the cafeteria. I uncomfortably finished my meal in silence beside the oblivious boy. When the bell rang, I mumbled some excuse about meeting my coach and bolted outside. To my horror, though, I soon heard loud footsteps behind me on the walk home a short while later. Gavin waved eagerly when he pulled up alongside me, huffing air. "Buddy, funny running into you. Hey, wanna grab a six-pack and work on astronomy later?" He grinned expectantly, but I quickened my stride. "Actually, I'm busy tonight. Maybe some other time," I muttered, refusing to look at him anymore. Before I reached my house, he suddenly shouted, "Hey, look, a cop car out front." My stomach dropped seeing the empty curb, but I heard him cackling loudly behind me. "Made you look? You're too busy, man." He playfully punched my shoulder while I stared at him dumbfounded by the immature prank. I hurried inside without another word, thoroughly creeped out. My phone dinged a few minutes later with a number I didn't recognize. Stupidly, I looked to see a string of confused and angry texts from Gavin, demanding why I was being so rude. I couldn't believe this guy claiming we were tight after just one day. Setting my phone to silent, I tried focusing on homework until Connor picked me up later to hang out. But relentless knocking at the door around 9 p.m. startled me from concentration. I peered out to see a fuming Gavin standing on the porch glaring straight at me. My heart stuttered seeing him boldly trespassing here in the dark uninvited. I dug out my phone to dial 911, but Gavin suddenly shouted that he saw me and knew I was inside hiding. Fighting panic, I flicked off the closest lights and ducked below the windows, slowly crawling deeper into the dark house. To my horror, loud banging abruptly started the back door on the other side of the kitchen. Gavin's enraged voice carried clearly through the door's glass pane. "Let me in, damn it. I see you crawling away, coward. You can't avoid me." More angry pounding followed when I didn't respond. Fingers fumbling, I managed to pull up Connor's number and hit call, crouching in the blackness listening to Gavin trying to break the door down. My friend thankfully picked up on the second ring. "Connor," I whisper shouted, "that freak Gavin tracked me home somehow. He's trying to break in." Rattling crashes emphasizing my point pierced the receiver. "What the hell?" "Och, dude, hold tight. I'm 5 minutes away," Connor urged. "I'm calling the cops right now too. Just stay hidden." It felt like an eternity skulking silently through the darkened house before police sirens and screeching tires finally signaled outside. Heavy footsteps clumped up the walkway as shouts for Gavin to put his hands up filled the air along with howling curses in response. I peered around the curtain edge watching in bewilderment as it took 3 burly officers to pin the weedy but surprisingly strong team face down against the cruiser to finally cuff him. Connor pulled up just then and spotted me cautiously cracking the door. Police statements and paperwork took forever to recount the deeply unsettling first-day bonding experience from hell with my unstable stalker classmate. But eventual confirmation from authorities that Gavin would be removed from school and forced into counseling eased my mind.